Hezbollah launches hundreds of rockets and drones at Israel after it targeted the group in southern Lebanon. Both sides say more will follow. How significant are these cross-border attacks, and how closer do they bring the world to a wider regional conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Southern Lebanon once again under Israeli attack while Hezbollah hits back with rocket and drone strikes against targets across the border. It's the latest in a cycle of violence as Palestinians remain under constant attack in Israel's relentless war on Gaza. Well, the latest escalation shows the potential for the conflict to spread. Iran backs Hezbollah. Israel is supported and armed by Western nations. So what do these latest attacks mean? And how great is the risk of a wider regional conflict? What's stopping it from happening so far? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Wilson Dysart.
In what appears to be a significant escalation, Israel launched what it called preemptive strikes across southern Lebanon early on Sunday. It said it was targeting Hezbollah positions in the region. The cross-border violence has been happening for months. Iran-backed Hezbollah began firing rockets into northern Israel in protest against the war on Gaza. It has said it will continue to do so until there's a ceasefire. But despite efforts to bring an end to that war, Israel has kept up its attacks, threatening a wider regional conflict. People in Lebanon say they're living in constant fear. Stranded passengers in Beirut watched helplessly as flights were canceled one by one after Sunday's attacks.
I just want to get out of here by any means possible. I tried to go out by land. I tried with whatever airlines. In any way, I just want to get out of here, then I will figure it out.
I was already uncertain when I came here for vacation. I was thinking to myself that at any moment there could be a conflict breaking out. So being here powerless, it's frustrating, especially since my studies are at stake. There's my situation there, and on top of that, I have paperwork for my residency, for security and everything. So being stuck like that, hands tied, I don't know.
Hezbollah had promised to respond to Israel's assassination of one of its senior commanders, Fuad Shakur, killed in Beirut in July. In its statement, it said it targeted a number of enemy sites and barracks, as well as platforms for Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Hundreds of fighters and civilians on the Lebanese side of the border have been killed in Israeli strikes in recent months. And hundreds of thousands of Israeli civilians have had to move away from their homes in northern areas.
We are determined to do everything possible to protect our country, to return the residents of the north safely to their homes, and to continue to uphold a simple rule. Whoever harms us, we harm him.
Tension has been high in the region since Israel assassinated senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in recent weeks. Iran has promised a response to the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in its capital Tehran on July 31st. The U.S., which has promised ironclad support to Israel, is sending more military and naval personnel to the region. Just last week, it approved another arms sale to Israel, worth $20 billion. As the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza continues, the entire region remains on edge, fearful of what could happen next. Wilson Dysart, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us from Beirut, Hala Jaber, a journalist and author of books on Iraq and Lebanon, including Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance. In Athens, Nicholas Snow, political advisor and editor of the Voice of Hezbollah, the speeches of Hassan Nasrallah. And in Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, professor at the University of Tehran. A warm welcome to all of you. If I could start with Hala in Beirut. So Hala, how do you read these recent exchanges between Israel and Hezbollah? Were they as wide-ranging, as deep as some may have expected?
Good afternoon, everybody. Today's offensive by Hezbollah actually showcased something very important, that a non-state actor and not a classical army, in fact, a resistance group, was able to impose deterrence against one of the so-called strongest, if not the strongest, alleged militaries in the region, Israel. And it did so by utilizing or using cheap rockets and not its most sophisticated drones to penetrate the Israeli skies, to reach up to 110 kilometers deep into Israel and about 110 north of Tel Aviv, and to impose a new level of deterrence against Israel.
But we still saw the Israelis launch what they are calling a preemptive strike.
I'm coming to that exactly. So according to Netanyahu, Israel launched a preemptive strike and actually finished off, if you want, or took care of between, initially it said 1,000, then it was 6,000, and it reached up to 8,000 of Hezbollah rockets or missiles. However, there were no secondary there were no secondary explosions. There were no military losses. Hezbollah is known to announce immediately any numbers of losses. Should that have been the case, Hezbollah would not have been able to launch 320 between drones and rockets into Israel. Each of the drones, if you want, usually takes about 2 to 3 hours preparation, but also about 3 men, three figures, 3 men, 3 fighters to prepare. So you would be talking quite a lot of numbers. Now, what Netanyahu said actually, and what happened on the ground, no secondary explosions, no military killed, cast doubt on what he actually claimed, that they really finished off, or mostly finished, between 1,000, 6,000 or 8,000.
All right. There have been some reports there have been some reports claiming there were some casualties amongst Hezbollah fighters, things although not 100% clear at this point. Nick, looking at the situation so far, how do you read the intentions of both parties, Israel and Hezbollah, given the type of attacks, with both sides saying they've been focusing on military targets, the scale of attacks? Do you read in this that these strikes, these exchanges, are still within the parameters of what we can call, I guess, maybe carefully calibrated strikes?
I think that is the case. It's really hard to talk about intentionality with any of these actors. That's the first thing. Second of all, I think we're going to learn a lot more about the intentionality of Hezbollah when Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the party, speaks shortly in the coming hours, or when this is broadcast, he will have already spoken. So that's something else. But next, I think in general, what we have here in a normal situation is the off-ramps to de-escalation could be very available to all parties. Hezbollah could claim that they launched significant attacks. There's an Israeli military censorship. It's very hard to determine whether and to what extent that might be true. On the Israeli side, they can claim a mythical preemptive attack, which we've seen actually debunked several times, most notably in the August 2006 war, when the Israelis claimed a mythical 34-minute air operation that destroyed all of Hezbollah's significant rocketry, which turned out very much to not be the case. However, I think, in general, where we're at is not a normal situation. So the normal pathways to de-escalation after this kind of an exchange aren't available. We're 11 months into this war, which is properly and should properly be called a war. It involves not only Gaza and Palestine and Israel and also Lebanon. It involves a much wider swath of the region. I think that the calibration has been obviously once again careful from the Israelis, relatively careful. And again, this should all be between quotes because civilians are getting killed, civilian areas are being hurt in various instances by various actors. But in general, we're at a point where it's still not an open war. We haven't this morning until right now. But I would also caution viewers and all of us that this is a situation that has been ongoing for 11 months. Today's events may not be finished. And in any case, they are not likely to be finished because we are still very far away, it seems, from a durable ceasefire over the war, specifically in Gaza. And because that's the case, I still expect in the coming period, things will get more dangerous and we'll have more escalation.
So maybe more to come. Mohammad Marandi in Tehran, how significant is it that Hezbollah's retaliation for the killing of one of its senior commanders was not coordinated or synchronized with an Iranian retaliation for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh so far in what we've seen today?
Well, first of all, I should stress the point that Hezbollah has had no casualties so far. They've declared none. And Lebanon is not a large country. First of all, again, Hezbollah, if they are known, as your previous guest pointed out, to declare their martyrs. Second of all, in a place like Lebanon, you can't hide martyrs. So I don't think Netanyahu's claims are accurate, because based on those claims, you should have a very large number of people, soldiers from Hezbollah, injured or killed by the regime. But I think there must definitely have been coordination between the different members of the axis of resistance, meaning Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and of course, the resistance inside Palestine. But
what I mean, Mohammed, is we didn't see Iran launch that retaliatory strike that its officials have been talking about at the same time so far with the Hezbollah strike that we've seen so far. How significant is that? Can we read anything into that?
I would imagine that the Iranians want the Israeli regime, as well as Zionists in general, to continue guessing. They've caused a lot of damage to the economy over the past few weeks because they've kept them guessing. The Israelis had to move around a lot of their infrastructure to keep it safe. Their businesses have been disrupted, and military and intelligence agencies have had to have extra precautions in case there is a missile strike. So it is causing a lot of economic damage to the regime, and I think there's no need for Ansarullah or Hezbollah or Iran to carry out strikes simultaneously. In fact, I think the impact this way is more significant. But we also have to, as your previous guest pointed out, wait and see what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has to say in the coming hours.
Nick, looking at what's happening right now, what is the possibility, do you think, of a wider regional war breaking out?
Well, I'm one that has said and argued for really quite some time, since really November, that the likelihood of a much more expanded conflict, or really an open war, had been growing. And I still fail to see, given the total U.S. support for Israel, the extraordinary moral hazard that has been created in the sense of moving 1/3 of the U.S. Navy to the region to essentially or to overtly provide added firepower to the Israelis. All of these different factors, and also the tremendous capabilities that Hezbollah has kind of partially unveiled, I don't see how the Israelis can let this situation stand. And given the just tremendous support from the United States, just shipped over several $1 billion of weapons, billions of dollars in economic assistance as needed, etc.
Nick, it sounds like you're saying that you expect you read at least elements of the Israeli government would like to escalate this.
Oh, I definitely have rejected since the beginning this idea that nobody, quote unquote, wants war. I think that there are significant elements of the Israeli leadership that very much want to see a climactic, what they think is a climactic confrontation, especially with Hezbollah and especially with Iran. And many of them have argued publicly that this is a victory doctrine and that this is the only way to pursue Israel's interests. And the United States and the Biden administration have more or less gone all in on supporting whoever wants to press that agenda forward.
All right, Hala, how do you read Hezbollah's intentions going forward? I mean, they've said this is the first phase. Does anything that has happened in this strike give us any indication of what the next stages might look like, how wide they might be, whether they'll be joined by other regional players in the strikes on Israel, and when it might be?
I think today's statement in which they said this was the first phase, I think all of us read into this that there would be a second phase, and whether that was from Hezbollah or whether that was one of the other axes, be it Iran, Yemen, and Iraq, all of whom have promised their own reprisals for Israeli aggressions against them. However, there's one thing to note. On rereading this, it might be the case Hezbollah is actually saying this is the first phase. In other words, should Israel decide to respond to what happened today by enlarging this war, then that would bring on a second phase, which would be bigger and more serious.
Hala, it sounds like you're saying a chance that this might be over for now in terms of the Hezbollah.
I believe for the time being. I truly believe for the time being, this is the first stage, and this is as far with Israel having said they do not want to expand and not expanding, then things go back to what we had before, the normal back and forth fighting between the two sides, the support for Gaza, and let's not forget Gaza. But also one of the things you were saying is you were surprised about today's attack and maybe no coordination with Iran. I mean, we need to remember when all of the axes decided and pledged that they would do a reprisal against Israel for its aggression. None of them gave a schedule, but none of them said that this was going to be a coordinated attack either. They all agreed that each one had the right to respond. Now, whether they responded together or whether they responded independently, as we saw today, Hezbollah took the initiative and responded independently on its own, despite the build-up of American assets, troops, and vessels in the region. It was not intimidated. It still fulfilled its pledge to send a reprisal. Israel seems to have got the message, or at least the Americans, who appear not to want this to drag into a regional war, despite the buildup in the region. They're here to be prepared should it escalate further. But I think all parties concerned, including Iran, do not want this to expand into a regional war. And as such, Israel issued a statement saying we do not want to expand this beyond. So things will go back, because I think over the last month, with everything happening, we've been concentrating on the reprisals, the axis, Israel, and what's going to happen. And eyes have been diverted away from Gaza. So now it goes back to concentrating on Gaza and the war of support
on
for
watching
Gaza,
on that dynamic. Right. And just for the record, my question to Mohammad in Tehran was, how significant is it, rather than I am surprised? But thank you. You made a really good point in your analysis there, Hala. I want to bring Mohammad in, because it seems, listening to Nick's analysis and Hala's analysis, that the panel feel that Hezbollah not too eager to expand this right now. What about Iran? How do you read the appetite, particularly of the new government? Is it more interested in trying to address domestic issues and challenges, the economy, lifting sanctions, rather than seeing Iran's resources go towards getting bogged down in a war, potentially not only with Israel, but with the US?
No one in the region wants a regional war, except for, as your guest, one of your guests rightly pointed out, the Netanyahu regime. But the issue is that Martyr Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. He was attacked and murdered in Tehran, along with his companion. And he was in Tehran at the invitation of President Pezeshkian, and he was a guest at his inauguration, and he was a guest at an official government guest house. And we know quite well that the Israeli regime has already carried out attacks on Iran. We saw them strike the embassy in Damascus, and Western countries literally supported the regime in doing that. So Iran had to carry out an attack to create deterrence, and that deterrence lasted 3 months roughly. Mm-hmm. So if Iran does not strike the regime, it will only encourage Netanyahu and the people around him.
So, Mohammad, do you think a strike is inevitable? A direct strike from Iran is still on the table. It's inevitable. It's just a matter of time.
Absolutely. I have no doubt that there will be a significant strike that will be painful. It will be more significant than the Iranian strike in April. And we have to keep in mind that...
Has it been delayed, Mohammad? And if so, why haven't we seen it so far?
Well, there are a number of reasons why the Iranians have delayed the strike. One is that the Iranians are carrying out psychological warfare. As I said earlier, it's having a very significant impact on life in Israel. And so why not add to the misery of the regime by keeping them guessing for a while? Right. In fact, now that Hezbollah has attacked and the Israeli regime's response has been insignificant, I think people in Palestine will be even more concerned. They'll know that Iran will strike harder than Hezbollah, and they will have to wait for an Iranian strike as well. Right. So I think there is significance in that delay. I think there are also other reasons. I think during the negotiations, the Iranians probably, and I'm guessing this is sheer speculation on my part, that the Iranians were thinking that during the negotiations in Doha, maybe it would not be a good idea because then the Americans and the Israeli regime would try to blame Iran or Hezbollah or the resistance for the collapse of the talks. So Iran waited until it was exposed to everyone that the Americans and the Israeli regime were not sincere.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that because that segues nicely to the question that I was going to put to Nick, and I could see you wanted to get in there, Nick. So is there a link in the dynamic of these exchange of strikes and the talks going on?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the main event is whether a durable ceasefire in Gaza can be achieved. And I think that Dr. Marandi is correct. I think in general, almost all of the actors around the world would like to see a durable ceasefire. And it's really the Netanyahu-led government that is the outlier on this. However, I think that we should also say that Sayyid Nasrallah himself over the years, over a decade and a half, has said that he very much craves this great war that could clarify matters with Israel, but that he and the Iranian leadership also has said that they prefer strategically a different, more patient pathway rather than a sudden upsurge in an open war. So that's their stated interest. However, that being said, and that directly ties into why a durable ceasefire is seen as so important by Hezbollah, Iran, and Hamas as well, because then that will recalibrate what is an intensifying conflict where the resistance axis of Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, and others are in a difficult position because they can't actually right now inflict real heavy material damage militarily on Israel without going to an open war. But that, in doing that, it blunts their preference for a longer-term, patient, calibrated strategy where their advantages as asymmetric actors or as less powerful state actors can be enjoyed. So they're in a very difficult catch-22 here. And I think to Dr. Jaber's point, I would say going back to normal is not normal. I mean, we have been at the cusp of, the open war for many months. especially the last few weeks. So going backwards doesn't seem like a very good place for anyone. But then I would also just question both of our other guests on where that position is. In the end, if we go back to normal and things, kind of quiet down to the normal warfare of the last few months, you still have more than 40,000 Palestinians that are dead and more dying every day. You have Hamas with their military capabilities very likely being degraded on a daily basis. You have no hope for a durable ceasefire. You have a third of the U.S. Navy there buttressing the Israelis and Netanyahu for basically whatever they want to do. And you're not actually, for the resistance axis, not actually inflicting material damage on the Israelis.
Okay, I can see Hala's shaking her head in, I assume it's disagreement. Let me give her a chance to come in.
I am, because there's a bit of wishful thinking on that part, and there's a bit of sounding like what's going on in Gaza is to be blamed or laid at the doorstep of the Axis and Hezbollah, who are actually the only countries or groups in the region that are doing anything to alleviate Hamas. Look, to alleviate the war in Gaza. There is a very simple way to end this war in Gaza, and that rests with Israel and the Americans. America should literally cease to support, finance, provide weapons to Israel. I think Iran and the entire Axis have said, if that war in Gaza ends now, within seconds, everything is over. We stop. They stop, meaning we. I'm talking on like they would be saying, not me. The war would end. The fact that it hasn't ended is nothing to do with whether Hezbollah wants a large war or Nasrallah, as you said, is craving a large war. I think there's a wishful thinking maybe on your behalf. Large wars, let's not forget, we're talking about the deaths of people, civilians, like we've seen in Gaza, we can have in Lebanon. So whoever is planning these wars is also taking into consideration, right, the numbers of people that could be killed, and this is no light matter. And trying to avoid that, it's very easy to send bombs or missiles to hit random buildings and kill civilians on the other side. If we look at the last 10 months, we will note that it is Hezbollah that has maintained it ethically against military targets, whereas Israel has actually attacked civilians everywhere in Gaza, as we've seen, and in Lebanon. To end the war in Gaza, the final decision on that, or the power that has, or the country that has a power to stop that war, is the United States, together with the Western countries that are supporting Israel.
Calls the final shot. It's a common sentiment.
Of course it does.
All right. I'm afraid we are out of time. I know there's a lot more that we can go on discussing, but we'll be back for another show. No doubt we'll have some of our guests back again. Let's, for now, thank them all for their contributions. Hala Jaber, Nicholas Snow, and Mohammad Marandi. And thank you for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the entire team here. For now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.